Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
All right, welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. Could have been anywhere else than Dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and our season preview series continues, and it moves out to the West Coast. We've brought in Shane Hoffman, who's going to educate us on everything Oregon Ducks basketball. You can follow him over on Twitter at Shane_Hoffman, 2 Fs. He is the sports editor over at the Daily Emerald, and you can find all of his content through his Twitter handle. Shane, thank you so much for joining the podcast. How's everything going out west?
Pretty good. I appreciate you having me on. It's an exciting time out here. It seems like the Pac-12's got a lot of momentum after March Madness last year, and we've got some nationally ranked teams, so it should be a fun season.
Yeah, thanks for stepping aside from the big things that Ducks football is doing, which we know you're covering as well. And then if you're enjoying what you're listening to and you enjoy the kind and knowledge-dropping guests that you've been listening to on the pod, give the podcast a follow over on Twitter, SDS Podcast, efficiency of keystrokes, of course. And then maybe leave a nice, kind review on your podcast consumption vehicle of choice. Say nice things about our guests like Shane and say nice things about the content that you're receiving. We're trying to bust out as much as we can. All right, Shane, let's get to last year. Last year was another great year for the Ducks. They continued to be a major factor on the hardwood, not dissimilar from the gridiron, a Sweet 16 run, NBA lottery pick. Shane, can you isolate a defining moment out of the many Oregon highlights from last season?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I think the moment actually for me is when Oregon center and Folly Dante tore his ACL. Happened 6 or 7 games into the season, and 3 or 4, maybe 5 games after that, Dana Altman, who's pretty notorious for being willing to kind of experiment with lineups, he went to this small ball lineup. And so it was 5 guys who were above 6'6", and basically under, between 6'6" and 6'8", and they really played to their strengths. I mean, I think they won 13 of their last 16 games, and they were number 1 in the conference, and threes made and steals, and they kind of turned into this team that was a nightmare for some teams matching up with them. It tailed off kind of when they played USC and the Mobley twins. Obviously, that's kind of where their season ended there. But all in all, I think that moment really changed the outcome of the season, and they found their identity through that lineup change, I think.
It seemed like that lineup really produced interesting results on the perimeter, not dissimilar from the Nevada team a few years ago under Coach Muss, where it just seemed like everybody was 6'6" or 6'7" and had multiple skills. They switched everything. And that's the trend of NBA and basketball on that level. So it's not, it's great coaching by Coach Altman to adapt to the injury that's going to influence and find some successful recipes. One of the ingredients to that recipe, Shane, is the transfer market. The Ducks just continue to find success wading through it. And what do listeners need to know about this season? Who's coming in? We have somebody, local from Rutgers that's joining your squad. So catch up the listeners on the rest of the transfers that, Coach Altman and his staff does just such a great job navigating.
Yeah, I mean, it's become almost cliche at this point. Every time he lands a transfer, it becomes, well, Altman's done it again, but he's just so good at it, and he finds guys that fit pretty seamlessly. And personally, just as a reporter, I'm excited to see how this year's team kind of comes together. The first guy I'd probably highlight is Devion Harmon from Oklahoma. He was kind of a combo guard who can slash, and if he improves his shooting, I think he's going to have a huge season. He's going to play alongside Will Richardson, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, and he'll be able to kind of bring the ball up or play off the ball, and I'm sure he'll be in the starting lineup. Jacob Young from Rutgers is another one, and he's interesting because obviously brother of Joe Young, who went to Oregon several years ago, and I'm wondering what his role will be. But we've seen him at Rutgers. We know, he has that kind of senior leadership, and he can hit shots in big games. And so, is he a guy that's more served for the 6-man role, or you want to go with 3 guards in the starting lineup? So that's one thing I'm curious to see. And then the other guy is Quincy Guerrier from Syracuse, who can play really all over the place, both in terms of who he can guard, but also his skill set. If he can start shooting more, he shot, I think, 31% last year at Syracuse, then things become really interesting because he's, I think, kind of the quintessential Altman 4-man, where he's got a lot of skills and very multiple, especially on defense. And then there's a JUCO guy Rivaldo Soares. I don't know if call him a recruit or a transfer. Just a dynamic JUCO scorer who I don't know if he'll play that much this year. He might be off the bench, but really promising skills on offense, especially shooting the ball. So whether it's this year or in the future, he'll have a role for sure.
And we've seen the success that your program has had with JUCO transfers, especially with Duarte, and what he's doing now on the next level for the Pacers. And you mentioned Joe Young. He also had a little Pacer history as well in the NBA. So one of the other parts that Oregon is doing such a great job with is bringing in some of these high-level freshmen. And this particular class, I think the term that we're going to stick with is like there's a lot of length and it's really long. Who are some of the freshmen of note that might solve that height problem that we talked about on the intro and maybe give them some valuable minutes inside, whether it be as a rim protector or just getting some paint touches?
Yeah, another trend too with the transfers has been people transferring out. And so they lost some of their guys. They lost to Chandler Lawson, and then his brother, Jonathan Lawson, decommitted. So what you have now is essentially just a class made up of Nathan Biddle, who is this 5-star kind of unicorn center from California. He's skinny, but he can shoot the hell out of the ball. He can defend the rim. And so he's a guy, and I don't think he will necessarily start. But like you said, this Oregon team, the biggest difference is they're going to be bigger this year. And so I would be shocked if he's not at least in the rotation. And I think you'll have some growing pains. And we know Altman's biggest thing is defense. So that's going to be the big thing. Altman loves shot blockers, but you have to be sound defending the pick and roll and being able to kind of play different coverages on that. So if Biddle can adapt to that early, then he'll have, I think, a sizable role. But he's the guy to watch, no question.
Yeah, it sounds that way. Just from you mentioned the skill set, combination with his, physical tools and makeup. Like if it sounds like Chet Holmgren light a little bit, like, big guy can shoot a little bit, maybe can handle a touch. And I think we'll see the advancement on those other skills once he does find his place in the rotation. And yeah, you're right. We need to talk a little Will Richardson. He's one of our favorite players returning this year in college basketball in the entire nation. I'll probably find a spot for him somewhere on an All-America team or something of that nature. Who else is going to hold responsibility and opportunity for the returning Ducks and what Coach Altman does bring back from the Sweet 16 roster?
Well, first things first, I'm glad that you guys are so tuned into Will Richardson. I think he's, I don't want to say underrated, but one of the most, what's the word I want to use? He's not slept on, he's not underrated, but I just don't think he gets much national recognition for a guy who's just really sound in everything he does. And he started, you could see it early on as a freshman. I remember watching him as a freshman, and he'd come in and the whole offense would change because he's so unselfish. He's so smart and cerebral for such a young player at that time. And he's only grown from there. Just like such a tremendous three-point shooter, and his size, he's a good finisher. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he actually carves out an NBA kind of, or at least works his way onto an NBA roster after this year. But I'm glad you guys recognize him because I think he's going to be super key to this team, and he's gotten better every season. He's one of only like 3 returnees, or I guess 4 really. But another guy to watch is Eric Williams, who actually played on the floor for the first time last year after having been here for 2 years, but he's a Duquesne transfer. He's about 6'6", and he was a key part of that lineup last year, kind of a shooting guard, forward, whatever you want to call him, great rebounder, great vertical athlete for a wing. His percentages shooting-wise, both from 2 and 3, were down last year after having some kind of prolific scoring performances at Duquesne. But I think second year in this system, those will shoot up. What I don't know is his exact role. I mentioned earlier that I think Jacob Young, could be perfect for a 6-man role, but he also might start given his pedigree. So whatever happens with him, Eric Williams will either start at the 3 or he'll probably come off the bench as the 6th man. So he's a guy to watch. But the guy I'm just fascinated with is Frank Kepnong. He was a freshman who enrolled early last year. Just this huge, hulking 7-footer, somewhere in there, 6'11" maybe. Rim runner, shot blocker, but just, crazy energy and really a leader even as a freshman. I actually have an interview with him later. I'm super excited to talk to him because he's just this crazy, interesting kid with all this stuff going on. But he's also going to be super key to this team because, as I mentioned earlier, Dante tore his ACL last year, and he's still, more than a month out. So he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. And I think Frank's going to come and just steal the job. And, everything we saw down the stretch last season, he didn't play a ton, but he ended up becoming kind of the first big off the bench after that small lineup was in. And he's just so powerful and he's reckless too. So I think another year he'll get to kind of fine tune some of his skills. But those Altman teams in the past that have had success have always had the rim running shot blocker, whether it was Jordan Bell, Bol Bol, Kenny Wooten. I'm probably forgetting someone. There's all these guys. He can be that guy for this team.
If you're comparing him to, the lists of bigs that you just mentioned from past successful Ducks teams, I think that's nothing but the highest compliment that you can give. And if he's going to come in and have that type of impact with, we mentioned, the wings around him, I think that spells success for Oregon. And we're right with you with Will Richardson. I think his pace of play is really unique and his own. And so he doesn't get sped up or slowed down. And you're correct. His basketball IQ combined with, his shooting prowess and his ability to really diagnose what to do in a set offense is invaluable. And to have him come back, I think he's, like you said, underrated, under the radar, in the weeds, whatever term you want to throw at him as far as not getting enough shine. I think it's appropriate if we're talking about Will Richardson, no doubt. All right, let's take a look inside the Pac-12. Your conference, the Conference of Champions, houses one of the highest ranked teams on all preseason top 25s in UCLA. What game or what matchup do the East Coast people need to stay up for to continue their, college hoops vagabond lifestyle inside the Pac-12 involving the Ducks?
Yeah, look, this Ducks roster, and we'll talk about it in a sec, I think is a roster that in any other year would probably win the conference. But we have UCLA. We have this powerhouse who returns everybody essentially. I was reading some articles on The Athletic the other day, and they've got Ju Zhang ranked as the best returning shooting guard, and Jaime Jaquez is the best returning small forward, and they've got all this talent. And so whatever it is between the Ducks and the Bruins is a must watch. And I hope that they find some ways to get those on some nationally televised, really spotlight games. I'm sure they will because both teams will be ranked. But Oregon takes their first big Pac-12 road trip is mid-January. I think they play on the 13th and the 15th. The first one's UCLA, the second one's USC. And that stretch will say a lot about this Ducks team, win or lose. And that's, I think, going to be must watch because not only UCLA, whose program is probably going to be a top 5 one this year. You can, say what you will about them, somewhere in there. And then USC, who is going to be strong again. I don't know if they're going to be as strong as last year. They lose Evan Mobley, but they still have a lot of guys returning, including Evan Mobley's brother and Isaiah. And they get Boogie Ellis from Memphis, some other guys. But they also knocked the Ducks out of the tournament. And right. Not only did they knock them out, but there was some jawing between those teams last year where they beat Oregon badly in the regular season down in LA. And then Oregon kind of, because of some of the algorithms and whatnot, ended up kind of what they called stealing the Pac-12 title from them. It was a weird year. A lot of games canceled because of COVID. Right. And then they made another statement in March Madness and wiped the floor with the Ducks, who were just too small. And that was the thing. So with a bigger Ducks team, I wonder how that goes. But that road trip is must watch. And I think if you're following Oregon, that's the one where you'll know whether they're legit or if, maybe they're second or third rung this year in the Pac-12.
Fair enough. I think that's a really important stretch. And anytime you have that 2-game road trip where you're going to go play back-to-back on the road against, high-level conference opponents, I totally agree with that. That is must-watch. Let's hope, Bill Walton is involved somehow, and it's not exclusively on the Pac-12 network, so everybody can watch it. That'd be great. Cross our fingers on that for sure, Shane. All right, so let's take a peek at the non-conference, Shane. They always, the Ducks always schedule aggressively to their benefit. What are a few matchups or, the matchup that we might need to circle, highlight, underline for the Ducks in the non-con this particular season with this particular roster?
Yeah, so they're playing in the Maui Invitational, which is in Vegas this year, actually. So maybe we call it the Vegas Invitational.
Right.
There's going to be some competitive teams in there. Butler, Houston, those teams come to mind. But I don't want to project too much because they might not even play any of those teams. Who knows, right?
Right.
So the team that I'd say will be the biggest non-con matchup is Baylor. Baylor's coming to Eugene December 18th. A team that obviously loses Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler to the NBA, but they still have some guys returning. I think Maceo Teague is gone, but they still have Flagler, Meyer, James Akinjo comes in, who used to be at Arizona, and then I think he was at Georgetown, or maybe vice versa, something like that.
No, you got it.
They still have some guys there. I know he's been around a lot of different conferences now, and they're just a physical team. They're super well coached. I mean, like watching that coaching matchup alone is going to be super interesting. It's a game that I'm not sure I'll be able to go to because I might be home in Michigan during that time, but that's going to be a must watch for me. And another one of those kind of games before that Pac-12 road trip that I think will tell you a lot, as cliche as that might sound, about this Ducks team.
No, I think anytime you're going to go up against the defending national champions, regardless of how many NBA guards they've lost to the past season, they still have some talent there. You highlighted that perfectly with Flagler and Meyer, and you mentioned Akinjo. We're familiar with Akinjo over on the East Coast during his days from Georgetown, and he is just like the perfectly gift-wrapped transfer where he's kind of ready to go, and you can just boot up the offense in him and then see how it rolls. And we've seen the success that Baylor has had with, transfer guards, the ones that we just mentioned, of course, and that now are off to NBA careers. All right, Shane, let's get you out of here on this one. Please don't forget to give Shane a follow over on Twitter at Shane_Hoffman, 2 F's in Hoffman. And don't forget to pay attention to maybe thedailyemerald.com, where you might find a few of his items as well. Shane, after another Sweet 16 run, does this squad hold the same type of promise, or is it maybe something slightly different or further or improved? What's the vibe going on up in Eugene, and what's the feel on this Ducks team?
I've gone really back and forth on this. And it's funny, too, because this is going to be another season where I think actually the women's team might kind of overshadow them a little bit, because the women's team is I think, 10th. I think the Ducks are now 13th, which I think is a little bit low personally. But just a great basketball vibe all in all in this city right now. This is hard, though, because last year's team did have so much talent. I mean, Chris Duarte, I don't even know if I really realized how good he was in the moment. You started to see it at the end of the season, but the numbers he was putting up, the consistency, and it was the same with Peyton Pritchard the year before, but it's almost not at all a surprise that they've both been so dynamic early on in the NBA. But I just keep coming back to the thing with the size, and that team played one way and they played it really well, and it worked against some teams like Iowa and didn't work against some teams like another physical team in USC. I love this roster just objectively. Like, I just think it has a ton of balance. I love the guys they brought in. They can play small again. I mentioned, like, with Jacob Young, like, they could roll out 3 savvy veteran guards, and then Eric Williams and put Gary A at the center. That's an option. Yeah. Or they could run Kepnong out there with Biddle, and God forbid Gary A at the 3, and they could go really big with that big point guard and Will Richardson. So you have a lot of kind of, I think, lineup dynamism, there. And I think the way that they gel will say a lot, obviously. And I think Altman's teams tend to gel towards the middle or the back half of Pac-12 play, and they always enter March hot, it seems like, at least since I've been in school here, and even before that. I think they can go farther than the Sweet 16. I really do. I think Sweet 16 might even be their floor. I know that sounds, kind of crazy in a way, but I just think they're like legitimately an elite team, and I think they're being a little overshadowed by UCLA. But again, when you have a team like UCLA that's nationally renowned now, there's going to be more chances for big Pac-12 wins. And I think the Pac-12 is just respect as a whole. Maybe we get a few more teams up into the top 25, because that's been the problem, is those big, blue chip wins. They can get those. they can gel at the right time like they've been doing, I really think this could be potentially an Elite Eight team. But at least I think Sweet 16, I really think this is a really talented roster. I think it's deep, versatile, and I think there's a lot of veteran guards on it, we know how important those are in March. So.
No doubt, Shane. And we adore Sedona Price here and the women's program that you got rolling over there, of course. I'm glad you gave them a little shout and a little mention. And listen, if we just pay attention to history, there's not many coaches better than your coaching staff of melding and mixing all of those different ingredients to find success later on in the season. Does it take a little while, like you mentioned? Are we going to wait until maybe February to see what this, the true rotation and how everything is going to be interconnected? Maybe, but I think you just made some Ducks fans' day by saying that this team might actually, out-achieve last season's team. So, Shane, we're going to follow you, of course, all season. And thanks for providing some insight on the Pac-12 and Oregon Duck basketball.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad that we're getting some Pac-12 recognition. I think it should be a fun season in the Conference of Champions. And no matter what, I think it'll be a fun season for the Ducks.
We're looking forward to it here on the East Coast. We're looking forward to staying up late. Thanks so much again, Shane. Cilantro, gratulatia, arigato, everybody.